My name is Natalie Vance. I'm 42 years old. I serve as a naval intelligence officer for the United States Navy, with a clearance level so high my own mother doesn't know what I actually do. Last Saturday night was supposed to be the most honorable moment of my career. I was being promoted to captain, and for the first time in nearly 2 decades, my entire family showed up. My mother flew in from Montana. My Aunt Beth, who never leaves her lake house, wore pearls for the first time since my father's funeral. And even my brother, Christopher Vance, a field agent with the Navy Criminal Investigative Service, stood in the back, stone-faced and quiet. I should have known something was wrong when he smiled at me. The event took place at a private hall in Annapolis. Uniforms, medals, champagne flutes. The room glistened with tradition. People I had served with across continents raised their glasses. My commanding officer said kind things about my discretion, my loyalty, my 15 years of flawless service under classified directives. I didn't like speeches, but I smiled anyway, because it was almost over. Just as I stepped forward to accept the ceremonial insignia box, something I had waited half a lifetime to receive, Christopher walked onto the platform without being called. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at the crowd and said, "Stop this ceremony, she's a fraud." Gasps followed. I heard glasses rattle. A woman in the audience mumbled, "What is he doing?" And then, as if on cue, Christopher pulled out his badge and a pair of silver handcuffs. He turned to me. "Lieutenant Commander Natalie Jane Vance," he said, voice sharp. "You're under arrest for impersonating a naval officer under a falsified identity." I didn't speak. I didn't blink. I let him turn me around and lock the cuffs behind my back. My mother screamed. Someone dropped a wine glass near the buffet table. A Marine colonel shouted, "Is this real?" No one moved. Christopher didn't flinch. He held up a manila envelope. Inside were printed files and darkened photographs. "Her name isn't even Natalie Vance," he said. "It's Natalie Jane Morgan, and she's been using forged credentials under a black flag clearance that doesn't exist." The room erupted into low murmurs and disbelief. My aunt clutched her chest. My cousin covered her child's ears. I kept my chin up, said nothing. I had seen this before, just never from my own blood. Christopher led me toward the center aisle. No one stopped him. Not the Admiral of Ceremonies, not the military attaché, not even the rear admiral sitting in the third row. Because in that moment, no one knew what to believe. And that was exactly what Christopher counted on. Then it happened. The air shifted. Someone whispered, "Who is that?" At the far end of the ballroom, the double doors creaked open, and a man stepped in. No uniform, no medals, just a gray suit and a presence that silenced everything. He walked with a limp, but he didn't use a cane. His hair was silver and cut to regulation. His eyes were cold, calculating, and entirely unimpressed. My brother's hands froze. The man approached slowly, measured, and stopped only inches from us. He looked directly at Christopher. Then, with a voice as heavy as a gavel, he said 6 words. "Get your hands off my wife." The room fell into dead silence. My brother's face turned from smug control to confusion to raw terror. It took him a full 3 seconds to process the sentence. He looked at me, looked at the man. "Your wife?" he stuttered. The man nodded. "I am Fleet Admiral Raymond Vance, former commander of the United States Pacific Fleet. And this woman is not only who she says she is, she's done more for this country than you'll ever be allowed to know." Someone dropped their phone. A woman gasped. The medal presenter sat back in her chair like she'd been shot. Raymond stepped forward, unclipped the cuffs from my wrists, and handed them calmly back to Christopher. "And if you ever lay a hand on her again, not even your badge will save you from what follows." My brother took a step back. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Because every question that once filled the room now had a different tone. How could I be married to a 5-star admiral? Why didn't anyone know? Was everything Christopher said a lie? Or worse, a half-truth? Raymond wrapped his hand around mine. My fingers were cold. I hadn't even realized they were shaking. He turned to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, if this ceremony is over, then I suggest we begin the hearing." He led me out. No more words were spoken. But as I walked past the rows of friends, family, and decorated strangers, I realized something more dangerous than betrayal had taken place. Someone had used truth as a weapon. And now, it was my turn to decide if I'd use silence as my armor, because the people in that room, they weren't just witnesses. They were the first to ever see the real me, and they had no idea what that would cost. They used to say I was born in Christopher's shadow. Even the photos proved it. In every family picture, he was in the center, chin up, uniform ironed, medals earned from high school ROTC programs. I was the blur on the side, the one with scraped knees, a book in my hands, and eyes that never looked into the lens. Growing up in a military family meant expectations came standard: order, excellence, discipline. But in our house, they all came prepackaged with one unspoken rule: be like Christopher. My mother never said it with malice. She would fold laundry and casually say, "Your brother always cleaned his boots before inspection," or "Christopher's drill sergeant said he had command potential," or the one I heard most often, "Maybe if you smiled more, people wouldn't think you're so distant." Distant. That was her polite way of saying strange, but I wasn't strange. I was just quiet. I noticed things. I asked questions. I listened more than I spoke. I had a gift for patterns, numbers, strategies, codes. When other kids were playing kickball, I was studying military flight formations and trying to solve encrypted puzzles from Dad's old training manuals. But in a world that worshipped charisma and noise, silence was often mistaken for weakness. Christopher, he was textbook perfection. Quarterback, honor student, prom king. He even volunteered to help fold flags at veterans' funerals. By age 16, he had already declared he'd become a Navy officer and make the family proud. By 17, he was accepted into the Naval Academy. At dinner tables, he led conversations. I washed dishes. At church, people shook his hand. I stood behind my mother. He was the one who would go far. I was the daughter who read too much. I remember once, in 8th grade, I broke a state math record. I brought home the certificate, beaming for the first time in weeks. My mother looked up, nodded, and said, "That's nice, sweetie. Did you hear? Christopher made captain of the debate team," and that was that. It wasn't that I hated him. I didn't. But somewhere between childhood and adolescence, admiration had curdled into something colder. He started talking down to me. When I'd mention a new tactic I read in a counterinsurgency manual, he'd smirk. "Reading about war and living it aren't the same, Natalie." At 16, he caught me practicing rifle assembly in the garage. He shook his head and laughed. "Leave that to people who actually pass the physical." I said nothing. I always said nothing. Because I had already learned. Arguing with Christopher was like punching a mirror. All it did was leave you with shards of yourself. My father passed away before I turned 18. Lung cancer. Decades of service couldn't protect him from what the war left behind. At his funeral, Christopher delivered a flawless eulogy. I stood beside the casket and didn't shed a tear, not because I wasn't grieving, but because the grief had nowhere to go. Afterward, I found my mother sitting alone. She looked up at me and said, "Your brother made your father proud today." And just like that, she buried 2 men in the same breath. I enlisted quietly, no celebration, no send-off. I forged my own path, applied for intelligence, qualified top 3 in my class. But when the acceptance letter came, I didn't tell anyone, not Christopher, not my mother, not even myself, really. Because part of me still believed what they all did, that I was just the girl in the corner, a shadow, a ghost. And ghosts don't get parades. They just learn to walk through walls, silently, unseen. And sometimes, that's the only way they survive. I didn't tell anyone I had enlisted until the day I shipped out. Not my mother, not Christopher, not even my best friend from school. I packed light, just one duffel bag, a notebook, and a second-hand copy of The Art of War. The only time my phone rang that week was from a recruiter double-checking my departure time. Boot camp didn't scare me. Silence had already taught me discipline. Rejection had already taught me resilience. And being invisible in my own house had already taught me how to disappear in plain sight. By the 3rd week, I was flagged for a separate interview. They didn't say why, only that I had scored high in abstract logic, advanced coding, foreign language aptitude, and firearms simulation. They moved me to a separate compound. 6 months later, I was accepted into naval intelligence. No ceremony, No photographs. I signed a document that legally erased my presence from half the systems that track military personnel. From that point on, I belonged to the shadows. I had 4 different operational identities, 3 temporary passports, and not a single social media profile to speak of. I have 4 names, I once told a fellow agent, 3 fake nationalities, and 0 birthday parties since 2009. He thought I was joking, but I wasn't. Over the years, I served in 12 countries, 5 continents, everything from data surveillance to tactical recovery to weapons procurement. But the job that stuck with me, the one that still plays in my mind like a slow burn film, was in Lagos, Nigeria. A cargo ship had been hijacked off the coast. 5 hostages, 3 armed pirates. One demand, release our men or they die. We didn't negotiate. I was deployed on a coastal response team. From the deck of a low-profile naval vessel, I was positioned behind a scope, breathing through my diaphragm, counting the seconds between each wave as it slapped against the hull. From that distance, the human face becomes a pattern, a moving shadow behind shattered windows and flickering lights. You don't see emotions, you calculate trajectories. One pirate held a child to the window. I waited. The child blinked. The man moved his hand, and I pulled the trigger. 1 shot. Center mass. The hostage ran. We breached. I recovered the hard drive the pirates were trying to extract. Encrypted military data they didn't even know was traceable. We saved 4 lives. The 5th hostage had already been executed before we got there. Still, the mission was considered a success. I was told, this is why we train ghosts, to make decisions humans can't. But ghosts don't get medals. We get silence. I flew back the next day, slept in a barracks 4 stories underground, ate alone, and not once did my family call. They didn't even know I had left the country. My mother sent me an email that week about a neighbor's wedding. She asked if I could make it to Montana for Thanksgiving. No mention of my deployment. No mention of the hostage crisis that ran on global headlines for 2 days. It was as if the Natalie they knew had been replaced, or worse, forgotten. But here's the thing about being forgotten. Eventually, you stop waiting to be remembered. So I leaned into it. I became the kind of officer they assigned to the black files. The kind of woman who could vanish into embassies, speak 3 dialects of Arabic, and pick a target out of a crowd without anyone noticing. I stopped looking for family and blood, started finding it in code names and encrypted channels, in the silence before a strike, in the rare smile of a teammate who knew what it meant to live in a world where failure cost lives. And success couldn't be spoken out loud. So when people ask me now if I ever felt lonely, I don't lie. I tell them the truth. Loneliness is easy. It's being invisible to people who say they love you. That takes practice. And I mastered it. I mastered the art of being a ghost. Because sometimes the only way to serve is to disappear. I arrived the day before the ceremony. My flight landed in D.C. just past noon. But I didn't head straight to Annapolis. I sat in the rental car for nearly 30 minutes at a rest stop just off Route 50, trying to remember how to walk back into a house that had never felt like home. My mother's voice was the first to greet me. "There she is," she said, as if I'd stepped out for milk and not returned for 2 years. She pulled me in for a hug. It was brief, one-armed, and smelled faintly of cinnamon and Vicks. Her hair was grayer than I remembered. Or maybe I'd just never looked closely before. The house was cleaner than it used to be. Sterile, like it had been scrubbed of memories. The dining room table was already set for 8. Polished silverware, folded napkins, a roast in the oven. Even Christopher was there, early, standing by the window, scrolling on his phone. He didn't look up when I entered. Didn't speak, either. "Still on that Navy schedule, huh?" my mother joked. "Always on time," I smiled. Small, controlled. No one asked about my flight, or my job. No one mentioned the promotion ceremony scheduled for the next evening. Instead, my Aunt Beth pointed at my left hand and said, "Still no ring?" My mother chimed in without missing a beat. "You're not getting any younger, Nat. You know that, right?" I said nothing. Took a sip of water. The glass was chipped. Christopher finally glanced my way. His smile was thin and tight. "Still working overseas?" he asked. "Here and there," I answered. You know, he said, lowering his voice slightly, some people think it's odd you're never in one place long enough to be on record. I met his eyes. Some people live on record, others live in service. He didn't reply. The tension settled like dust. Mom broke it with her classic fallback. You two used to be so close. Remember when you taught her how to tie a square knot, Chris? Christopher didn't laugh. Neither did I. Dinner was mechanical. Roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, and a side of thinly veiled questions. So, are you seeing anyone? Where do you live now? What exactly do you do again? I gave vague answers. Polite, non-specific. I'd learned years ago that the more details you give to people who've already decided what to believe about you, the more ammunition you hand them. Still no kids, huh? My cousin asked over dessert. Just the world's secrets, I replied. Only the dog looked genuinely happy to see me. A golden retriever named Maxwell who curled up by my feet and refused to move for the rest of the night. He was old, slow, and partially deaf, but somehow still more intuitive than everyone else in the room. At one point, Christopher stood and went to the garage. He was gone for almost 20 minutes. When he came back, his shirt was slightly damp at the collar. Everything okay? I asked. Just getting the wine, he replied. But his eyes didn't match the answer. There was something behind them, quiet, restrained, but simmering. Like a man who'd rehearsed a speech too many times, but wasn't sure when to deliver it. Later that evening, as I helped my mother pack away dishes, she said, You know, I never thought you'd be the one still alone at 40. I kept my back to her. Maybe I'm not as alone as you think, she sighed. You always were good at keeping secrets. It's not a compliment, Nat. I wanted to tell her that the man I married knew me in ways no one else ever had, that his absence was by design, that protecting me meant staying invisible, but I didn't. Because in that house, truth was just another foreign language. That night, as I lay in the old guest room, same quilt, same peeling posters on the wall, I stared at the ceiling and thought, there's something off. He knows something. He's planning something. I wasn't wrong, but I had no idea just how far he'd already gone. After dinner, the house grew quiet in that specific way families do when they run out of small talk and just wait for each other to leave. My mother retreated to her crossword puzzles. Aunt Beth watched a rerun of Jeopardy with the volume too low. The cousins disappeared into the guest room, giggling about something on a phone screen. That's when Christopher appeared in the hallway with 2 glasses in hand. Come on, he said. Let's have a drink. Just you and me. We walked out onto the back porch. The November air was sharp, but not bitter. He handed me a glass of bourbon, neat. Same way Dad used to drink it. The porch hadn't changed. Same splintered railing. Same wind chime that hadn't worked properly in years. Even the outdoor light buzzed with that faint hum, like a memory trying to resurface. He leaned against the post. I stayed standing. You ever miss it? He asked. Being home? Depends on the day, I said. He chuckled. A dry, rehearsed sound. We sipped in silence. Then, with that same too casual tone he used to use when he caught me sneaking cookies at night, he said, You know, I've been meaning to ask you something. I didn't answer. I knew that tone too well. Is it true, he continued, what they say about you? That you've been deployed to conflict zones? I raised an eyebrow. You mean, have I ever been to a war zone? He nodded. Yeah, I mean, the official story's always so vague. You never post anything, never write, never call. Sometimes it feels like you don't even exist. I sipped the bourbon slowly. Maybe that's the point, I said. He smirked, but there was no humor behind it. So, boots on ground? Or were you just sitting in some air-conditioned base, writing reports? I didn't blink, didn't flinch, just looked at him. Silence. He waited for an answer that never came. I had learned long ago that when someone asks a question that isn't really a question, it's a challenge, the best answer is none at all. Christopher took another sip, then stared out into the darkness. You know, he said, I've seen a lot in my work. Fraud cases, stolen valor, forged orders. You'd be surprised how many people fake clearance to get ahead. He didn't look at me when he said it. Didn't have to. I set my glass down on the porch rail. Good night, Chris, I said, and walked back inside. I didn't turn to see if he watched me go. Later that night, as the house creaked into sleep, Christopher stood in the garage. He kept the lights off. He held his phone to his ear and spoke in that clipped, official cadence I'd heard him use in courtrooms. "Yes," he said. "It's confirmed. She's here, tomorrow night." He paused. "We'll proceed after the ceremony begins, in front of everyone." Another pause, a breath. "No, she doesn't know," a muffled voice replied on the other end. Christopher's tone shifted, lower, colder. "She thinks she's above it all, that nobody's watching. But I've seen the files, the inconsistencies. I've been building this case for over a year." The voice said something we couldn't hear. "Don't worry," Christopher said. "By this time tomorrow, she won't just be stripped of her rank. She'll be exposed, discredited. And this time, she won't be able to disappear." He ended the call. No smile, no second thoughts. He stared at the wall of the garage, where Dad's old rifle used to hang. Then he reached into a box marked Xmas Lights and pulled out a sealed manila envelope. Inside, photographs, documents, sealed orders, stamped unclassified for review. Outside, the wind picked up. Inside, the plan was already in motion. And I, oblivious, was still upstairs, brushing my teeth, trying to rehearse what I'd say in my speech the next night. The speech I never got to finish, because the man in the garage wasn't just my brother anymore. He was my accuser, and I was already on trial. I'd barely touched my wine when the room shifted. It happened fast, like a wave rolling over a calm shore. 1 second, people were clapping, toasting, laughing. The next, the air turned stiff, like something had cracked just below the surface. Christopher stood up. His uniform, crisp and gleaming, caught the chandelier light in just the right way. It made him look even more decorated than usual. He stepped to the center of the banquet hall and cleared his throat. The mic hadn't even been offered to him, but someone passed it anyway, probably assuming it was a heartfelt toast from a proud older brother. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "before this ceremony continues, I have something that must be seen." The audience quieted. Wine glasses paused midair. I sat frozen, my smile half raised. He reached into a slim leather folder and pulled out a set of documents. "This is the real story of Natalie Vance," he said. Or should I say, Natalie Morgan. A wave of murmurs. One of my old instructors coughed. Someone at the next table actually laughed, nervously. Christopher tapped a button on the clicker in his hand. Behind him, the projection screen flickered to life. The first slide, an ID badge, black and white, low resolution. The name, Morgan, N. The photo was of me, but not any photo I'd ever seen. Hair pulled back, no rank visible, no insignia. Eyes like ice. Multiple aliases, Christopher said. Multiple deployments under different names. Her current title, rank, and clearances may not be what they appear. The second slide, a still image from a surveillance feed. It showed me speaking with a man in a crowded market, somewhere in the Middle East. This footage, Christopher continued, was obtained from a source in Naval CID during an internal probe. You'll hear a voice, hers, communicating in Arabic. No translator present. No formal authorization for the operation on file. The video began to play. My voice echoed through the hall. But it wasn't just my voice. It had been edited, stitched together, cut in places that only someone with deep technical skill could manipulate. "Do you have the package? The signal is live. We move at 0200. I'd said those words once, but not together, not in that order, and certainly not in the context they were being used now. Still, there it was, my voice, my image. The audience leaned in, unsure what they were seeing. The doubt hit like poison gas, silent, creeping, choking. Someone whispered, "Is she a spy?" Another murmured, "Was any of it real?" The third slide flashed. A page from a deployment log, heavily redacted. My name, or one version of it, appeared next to a mission that had been classified 5 levels above this room's clearance. "There are gaps in her record," Christopher said. "No chain of command that can be verified. No direct supervisors willing to step forward. Just shadows and silence." My mother turned to me, eyes wide. "Natalie, what is this?" I said nothing. I didn't nod, didn't blink. I just sat there, spine straight, hands folded, face unreadable, because I knew exactly what was happening. And I also knew Anything I said would only feed the fire. I scanned the room. Raymond wasn't there, not yet. Christopher took a step closer to my table. He held up a final page, bold letters across the top. Request for investigation, security breach suspected. I've submitted this to the Pentagon, he said. Tonight is not just a celebration, it's a reckoning. A gasp, then silence. You could hear a spoon hit a plate in the far corner. So, he asked me directly, do you deny it? Still, I said nothing. Not because I couldn't, but because I understood something no one else in that room yet did. This wasn't just about me, it was about the system, the silence it demanded, the stories it erased, and most of all, it was about who controlled the narrative. Sometimes, survival isn't about speaking louder. It's about waiting until the right voice speaks for you. And mine was on his way. Christopher took a step back from the projector screen, savoring the silence like a man who thought he'd just won a war. His chest puffed with pride, his voice steady, controlled. I've already informed the Office of Naval Intelligence, he said, and I've contacted 2 news outlets. They're standing by outside, waiting for comment. People started shifting in their seats. Some looked toward the exits. I could feel it, the pull of doubt, the quiet erosion of reputation. It spreads faster than truth ever could. Then, I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, measured. The kind of walk that didn't ask for attention, it commanded it. The rear doors of the banquet hall swung open, and in walked a group of 5 uniformed officers, Navy Legal Division. Their white gloves, their silver insignias, their eyes sharp and cold. In the middle of them stood a woman I knew well, Commander Ava Ling. We'd once sat side by side during a black site debrief in northern Norway, but no one else here knew that. She held a sealed folder in her hand. Christopher turned, blinking fast. "Can I help you?" he asked, confused, but not yet afraid. Commander Ling stepped forward and pulled a sheet from the folder. "Christopher Vance," she said, voice calm but lethal. "You are hereby served with a formal notice of investigation by the Department of the Navy for unauthorized dissemination of classified clearance-level materials." The room went absolutely still. "Excuse me?" Christopher laughed, glancing around like it had to be some mistake. "You distributed a restricted operations video," she continued, "to a civilian audience without redaction, clearance review, or chain of command approval. That is a direct violation of DoD Directive 5200-01. He turned red. "I didn't leak it," he said. "I presented it as evidence, internal family matter." Commander Ling didn't flinch. "The moment you projected that footage in front of unvetted guests, without prior clearance, you violated federal protocols. This isn't a family disagreement. This is an active legal breach." Another officer stepped forward and handed him a second document. This one with multiple stamps, signatures, and one unmistakable heading. "Notice of Investigation, Navy Intelligence Oversight Board." Christopher looked down at it like it was written in a language he didn't speak. "You can't do this," he said. "I'm the one exposing fraud here. She's the one with multiple identities." Commander Ling raised an eyebrow. "And all of her identities," she said slowly, "are protected under Tier 1 classified operations, validated by a joint agreement between Naval Intelligence and the Office of Counterintelligence Operations. You, however, acted alone." A stunned gasp ran through the crowd. He turned toward our mother. "Mom, you saw the video, right? You saw what she said. That wasn't normal." Mom didn't answer. A few seats down, someone muttered, "This just flipped upside down." And it had. Because suddenly, the room was no longer a courtroom with Christopher as prosecutor. Now he was the one under scrutiny. One by one, the guests who'd just been staring at me now shifted their gaze to him. I didn't move, didn't smile, didn't blink, just kept my eyes locked on his. Quiet, still. He opened his mouth again, probably to protest, but Commander Ling cut him off. "You have the right to file a rebuttal, but from this moment forward, you are under administrative observation. Any further contact with the press will constitute obstruction of inquiry." 2 officers took positions at either side of him, not touching but close enough to signal. "You're not in control anymore." He stared at me across the room, and for the first time in his life, he looked small, cornered, and afraid. I slowly stood, still didn't speak. But in that moment, I could see it in his face. He realized the game he'd started was much bigger than he ever understood. Because what he tried to weaponize against me, clearance, secrecy, silence, wasn't just my burden. It was my armor, and he had just punched it with bare hands. The moment Commander Ling and her officers exited, the noise started. Not from the Navy, from the family. Chairs scraped, silverware clinked, voices rose like smoke, first quiet, then desperate. I was still standing when my mother approached, her eyes red, her lipstick faded, her hands wringing the napkin like it could give her answers. "Natalie," she whispered, voice shaking, "just tell me the truth, please." I stayed silent, waiting. "Are you really who you say you are? Or was your brother right? All those years, all those gaps, were they lies?" Her words didn't sting like they should have. They landed more like a bruise you expected. She stepped back, wiping her cheek. "I don't even know what to believe anymore." Then Aunt Beth chimed in, arms folded, judgment already locked in place. "You were always too quiet, Natalie. Always gone. Always somewhere mysterious. It made us all uneasy." She turned to the others at the table, fishing for agreement. "We never asked out loud, but we always wondered, what kind of life is that? No photos, no holidays, no husband. It's unnatural." I felt like I was watching them read a script I didn't audition for. They weren't asking questions. They were rewriting history to fit their comfort. I didn't argue, didn't defend, because none of them wanted clarity. They wanted certainty, and that was never something I could give. So I stepped away, through the hallway, past the portraits I no longer recognized. Outside, snow was falling, quiet and unapologetic. I stood under the porch light, hands bare, breath fogging in front of me. The cold helped. It was clean, honest. And then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, expecting more accusations. But it was Lucy, my cousin, barely 20, soft-spoken, kind. The only one who'd ever written to me during deployment, even when the letters never came back. She held her coat closed with one arm, the other offering me a steaming mug. "Cocoa," she said. "The real kind." I took it, said nothing. We stood side by side, watching flakes drift down onto the frozen yard. Then she said, "I don't know what happened in there. I don't understand half of what was said, but..." She paused, her voice barely a breath. "I believe you." I looked at her. "Why?" She shrugged. "Because you didn't flinch, not once. You didn't defend yourself, not because you couldn't, but because you didn't need to." That hit harder than I expected. "Everyone in there," she added. "They wanted an explanation that made them comfortable, not the truth. That's what scared them." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "You're braver than all of them, you know," she said. I smiled, just a little. "No," I replied. "I'm just used to cold rooms." She chuckled. We sipped cocoa in silence for a moment. Then she said, "Whatever happens next, I want to help." "There's nothing to help with," I told her. "Still," she said, "I want to be there. You don't deserve to be alone for doing something important, even if they don't understand it." The words stayed with me, not because they healed everything, but because they reminded me that sometimes the smallest voices carry the deepest faith. Inside the house, my mother was still crying, my aunt was still whispering. Christopher was likely stewing in a locked office, replaying everything he'd lost. But out here, there was just snow, and cocoa, and a girl who still believed in me, even when the rest of my blood did not. Sometimes, family isn't who shares your name, it's who shares your silence, and still chooses to stay. The snow followed us as we drove. Raymond hadn't said a word since I got in the car. His hands gripped the wheel, not tight, but steady, like he was holding back a storm. The streets of Annapolis were quiet, cold, empty. It wasn't until we passed the old naval bookstore that he finally spoke. "You held the line tonight." I didn't respond. "Just watch the streetlights flicker against the windshield." "I read the whole file," he continued. "Everything Christopher pulled, every clip, every record he tampered with." He took a breath. He didn't even know what he was looking at. He thought it was a scandal. He didn't realize he was walking through a cemetery. That line hit like a shard of ice in my chest. Because he was right. There were 3 names in that file, 3 faces, 3 operatives, and all 3 were dead. Not because of me, but because of a misstep made months ago. A data packet misrouted through an unverified channel. The channel Christopher once insisted I take, to save time. And I had taken it. I closed my eyes. If I tell the truth, I whispered, 3 funerals will go public. Raymond nodded slowly. And if you don't, your name might never be cleared. They'll keep whispering, your mother will keep doubting, and every medal you've earned will gather dust next to shame. He glanced at me briefly. So I have to ask, what do you want? The question felt too large for words, too weighted for any answer I could give. I looked out the window again. A child was walking their dog on the sidewalk, bundled in a scarf too big for their body, oblivious to secrets, to blood, to war fought behind locked screens and unmarked graves. If I speak, I said, 3 lives will be unburied, but not honored, just exposed. Their families will receive nothing but questions, headlines, shame. And if I stay silent, I added, my family thinks I'm a liar, that I betrayed the flag, that I faked my way to the top. Raymond exhaled, his voice heavy. So which truth weighs more? That was when I looked at him, not as his wife, not as the general he once protected, but as a woman who had lived with ghosts for too long. Let them think I'm a fraud, I said. Let them whisper. Let them call me fake. I can carry that. I looked down at my gloved hands. But I won't let them know who really died. And why? He turned to face me fully now, one hand still on the wheel, the other resting on the gear shift. Natalie, you don't owe your brother protection. It's not about him, I answered. It's about the ones who trusted me to keep their names buried, even in disgrace, especially in disgrace. He nodded once, slow, with pain. I was wrong years ago, he said, voice low. I told you that being silent made you invisible, but now I see, it's what kept others alive. The car stopped at a red light. No one honked, no one passed. The city held its breath. You sure about this? He asked. Yes. Even if it means losing your mother forever? I didn't hesitate. Better she hates a lie than mourns a truth she'd never understand. He reached for my hand, just a light touch, not to console, not to persuade, but to remind me I wasn't alone. Then we stay quiet, he said, but not still. I nodded. Because there's a difference. Silence doesn't mean surrender. It can be armor, it can be rebellion. It can be love, twisted, painful, but necessary. And as the light turned green and we drove off into the snow, I whispered the names of the 3 who died. Just once. Just for me. Then I let them go. There's a name I never speak. Not out loud. Not in memory. Not even in the silence of my own thoughts. It belongs to a child I didn't see until it was too late. It was my 4th black operation, a mission in southern Chad. The intel was clean, or so we thought. Our objective: extract encrypted data from a rogue satellite terminal used by a warlord funneling arms across borders. It was supposed to be a surgical strike. 3 minutes in, 4 hostiles neutralized, 1 drive recovered. Minimal exposure, minimal risk. I was off coast, aboard a stealth destroyer retrofitted with drone guidance. My role, real-time decryption and sniper command. When the signal hit, I tapped into the feed, saw the compound. 4 heat signatures, consistent with adult male profiles. The drone circled twice. Confirmation came from satellite. I gave the green light. We fired. 2 shots, 1 from the drone, 1 from a coordinated land team. The terminal was destroyed. The drive was recovered. And then came the scream. Not from the radio, not from comms, but from the secondary cam, thermal imaging delay. A child, maybe 7, crawling from under the debris of the rear hut. We hadn't seen him. He wasn't on the heat scan. He'd been sleeping under metal sheets, insulated from detection, and now he was gone. We never put him in the report. He wasn't part of the enemy tally. No one in command said a word, no inquiry, no consequence. Instead, they gave me a commendation, a medal, for rapid fire clearance, for data preservation under hostile terrain. I declined. They called it humility. It wasn't. It was guilt. After that, I requested reassignment. Deep intel only. No weapons, no kill authority, just shadows. I became the person who designed the missions, but never pulled the trigger again. And every time they tried to pin a medal on my chest, I found a reason to avoid the ceremony. Classified deployment. Urgent transfer. Unavailable. Because honors don't feel like honors when they sit on bones. Back in the present, I sat alone in a quiet room, the same briefing room at Norfolk I'd visited dozens of times. Only this time, I brought something with me. A small envelope. Unmarked. Inside, one photo. Of the compound, before the strike. 4 adults, 1 child, all standing outside. It had been taken days before the mission. It wasn't even operational data, just an intercepted photo sent between militia camps. I'd seen it before the mission, but I ignored it, because the heat scan said 4, because the pressure said go, because I was young, and I wanted to prove I could make a call without hesitation. So I did, and I killed a child I never named. That's why I don't chase public glory. That's why I never invite my family to ceremonies. That's why I stayed a ghost. Some truths are too heavy for the sunlight, not because they're shameful, but because they carry the kind of weight that no explanation can lighten. Raymond once asked me why I didn't correct my brother when he called me a fraud. Because he's not entirely wrong, I said, just incomplete. I've saved lives since then. I've cracked codes that stopped trucks filled with explosives. I've rerouted airstrikes that would have leveled hospitals, but none of it brings that child back. None of it untells that story, so I carry it, not as a burden, but as balance, because the work I do in shadows is not to hide, it's to protect. And sometimes, protecting truth means burying it so deep no one can ever weaponize it again, especially your own family. It didn't happen in a courtroom made of marble and echo. There were no cameras, no gavel, no jury of peers. It was a military tribunal, private, methodical, and brutal in its restraint. Christopher sat 3 chairs from me, his uniform crisp, his posture still arrogant. But his eyes, they flickered. They always do when he's cornered. The presiding officer, Rear Admiral Skinner, didn't look at him first. He looked at me. Commander Vance, you have the right to remain silent. Are you here to testify or observe? I stood, my voice level. Neither. I'm here to clarify. The room quieted. Clarify what? He asked. I pulled out the file, not thick, just 12 pages, but every page had teeth. Clarify that I'm no longer covering for him. Eyes turned to Christopher. He shifted in his seat, trying to look confused, offended, innocent. But the weight had already shifted. The folder contained redacted comms logs, metadata tracing one encrypted satellite line from my base in Djibouti back to a civilian-registered router in D.C. A router registered under Christopher's home address. A router he'd let a freelance contractor access for data caching tests. The contractor was on contract for a logistics company we'd later discover had indirect ties to a shell entity based out of Beirut. 3 Navy SEALs, Maddox, Hartley, and Lynn, died in an ambush 2 weeks after that test. They were using compromised codes, and I had carried that for 18 months. Did you accuse him of this when it happened? Skinner asked. No, I said. I buried it. Why? Because if the truth came out then, I answered, we would have lost more than just a name. We would have lost trust inside an already fragile operation. And I wasn't sure if it was his fault. Not fully. I looked at Christopher. But I am now, he stood suddenly. Objection, this isn't a courtroom, Skinner interrupted. And you're not a lawyer. Sit. He did, slowly. So why come forward now? Skinner asked me. I paused, then answered honestly. Because my silence isn't protecting anything anymore, and because he weaponized my record to protect his own. I held his gaze. I didn't come here to destroy him. I came here to stop cleaning up his mess. The tribunal deliberated in the adjacent room for 45 minutes. I sat quietly. Christopher fidgeted, cracking the knuckles of his left hand. He always did that when nervous. When the officers returned, the verdict was read flatly. Lieutenant Commander Christopher Vance is hereby relieved of his current assignment, stripped of classified clearance, and suspended without pay pending formal dishonorable discharge proceedings. No handcuffs, No public shaming, just silence. And silence cuts sharper than steel when pride is all a man has left. As the room emptied, Christopher stayed seated. He didn't look at me, didn't speak, until I was almost at the door. You could have stayed quiet, I stopped. I did, for 18 months. He turned to me, eyes red, but not from guilt, from rage. You ruined me. I stepped closer, just enough that only he could hear what I said next. No, I let you walk away when I shouldn't have. This isn't revenge, Christopher. It's recoil. He blinked. Recoil? Actions have consequences. Like gravity. You can fight it, delay it, deny it. But it lands eventually. He looked like he wanted to say more, but his mouth just opened. And stayed that way. I left him there. Not in chains. Not in disgrace. Just in a truth he couldn't control. And for someone like him, that was the deepest punishment of all. The letter was folded once, cream-colored cardstock, typed neatly, my signature at the bottom. It sat on the edge of my desk, untouched, until Raymond placed it in my hand again. Are you sure you want to send it? He asked. I looked at the envelope. It wasn't long. Just 6 paragraphs, professionally worded, respectfully delivered. A request for leniency. A plea for my brother's military pension to be partially retained, on the grounds of prior honorable service, and to spare our mother the final humiliation. I had written it 3 days ago, alone at 2 a.m., in a moment of weakness, of habit, because no matter how many betrayals came, there was still a part of me that remembered being 5 years old, chasing after Christopher's shadow in our father's uniform. But I wasn't 5 anymore, and shadows weren't something I chased now. I walked through them. I took the letter from Raymond, held it in my palm, felt its weight, not physical, but moral. I thought about letting him go, I said quietly. I really did. Raymond nodded, but said nothing. But then I remembered Mina. He looked at me, and I knew he understood. Mina Park, special reconnaissance operator, one of the few people I ever trusted in the field. She died on an op in northern Syria, the one that unraveled after the data leak that originated from my brother's carelessness. Her death was chalked up to hostile miscommunication, but I knew better. I sealed the letter between my fingers, then slowly, deliberately, tore it down the middle, then again, and again, until it was nothing but a handful of silence. Forgiveness isn't weakness, I said, but truth needs someone to hold the line. Raymond's eyes didn't leave mine. He didn't try to stop me, because this wasn't about revenge. It was about drawing a boundary I should have drawn years ago. Later that afternoon, I found myself at the small cemetery just outside the Naval Academy grounds. Section 5, Plot 72. There was no crowd, no ceremony, just a name etched into dark stone. L.T. Mina Park. No family ever claimed her body. She had no living siblings, no listed parents, but she had me. I kneeled, placed a small bouquet of white camellias on the grave. No notes, no ribbons. Just the flowers. You deserved more, I whispered. Not just in life, but in memory. I sat there for a while, long enough for the wind to pick up, to tug my uniform jacket. Long enough for the guilt to rise and settle, not because I was responsible for Mina's death, but because I had tried to protect the one who was. When I stood, I felt lighter, not free, but resolved. There would always be a part of me that wondered, what if? What if I had spoken sooner? What if I had forced an investigation back then? But grief doesn't answer to hypotheticals. It only bows to truth. As I walked away from Mina's grave, I didn't look back. She wouldn't have wanted pity. She would have wanted accountability. And I was finally giving her that. The phone rang late. The kind of late that's not an emergency, just hesitation wrapped in awkward timing. I let it ring twice before answering. Hello? The line was quiet for a second. Then, are you okay? My mother's voice, soft, tentative, like someone knocking on a door they used to own but hadn't visited in years. I didn't answer right away, because how do you answer that? To the woman who once told you, you should smile more, no man likes a soldier. To the mother who used to say, why can't you be more like your brother? Now that same brother had publicly tried to ruin me, and she was calling to ask if I was okay. I closed my eyes. let the silence fill the space, then spoke slowly. I'm teaching now. Teaching what? She asked. I'm helping young women become the version of themselves I used to dream someone might believe I already was. Another silence, not the heavy kind this time, just honest. That's good, she said. That's really good. I could tell she wanted to say more, maybe an apology, maybe a justification. But sometimes the best things a parent can do when they're decades late is just show up in the silence. I didn't say goodbye, I just hung up. Some conversations don't need endings, they just need to exist. The next morning, I stood at the edge of the training field on base. Naval Advanced Leadership Initiative, a program I helped design from scratch. The wind bit through my sleeves, the kind of cold that wakes the nerves without numbing the instinct. In front of me, 24 women stood in perfect formation, all mid-20s, all sharp-eyed, all tougher than anyone would guess from a first glance. I stepped forward, boots crunching against the frost-hardened dirt. I won't ask you to be strong, I told them, because strength doesn't mean the same thing every day. They didn't blink, didn't nod, just listened. Some days, it means holding your line. Some days, it means letting yourself feel the damn weight before lifting it again. I walked the line slowly, pausing between each woman. This isn't about proving yourself to anyone, least of all your families, your exes, or some stranger in command who still thinks, "Sir," sounds better than "ma'am." They cracked half a smile at that. It's about learning the art of being underestimated and turning it into a weapon. Behind me, Raymond watched silently from a distance. He never interfered during my sessions. He said I had a gift for turning pain into precision. I didn't correct him. I just used what I had. As I neared the end of the line, a young cadet with a buzz cut and dark eyes held my gaze. Her name was Santos. She reminded me of myself at 22. Fierce, quiet, calculating. "Why do you still wear black laces, Commander?" she asked. It wasn't in the manual. She wasn't supposed to speak unless asked. But I answered. "Because black laces are what you wear when you bury someone you couldn't save." She nodded once, didn't ask again. She understood. That night, I stood alone on the firing range. The targets reset every 30 seconds. Each shot I took landed dead center, measured, clean, unflinching. The brass casings scattered at my feet like forgotten doubts. I didn't shoot for medals anymore. Didn't shoot for applause. I shot to remind myself that even when the world questions your name, you can still find peace in your aim. Closure doesn't always arrive with clarity. Sometimes it just arrives with quiet. And sometimes silence is the cleanest kind of justice. The bench is old, worn at the edges. Its metal bolts rusted from decades of sea air. But it faces the water, and that's all I ever needed. I sat in plain clothes, gray sweater, boot-cut jeans, no medals, no insignia. Just a woman letting the wind tangle her hair. The harbor below was quiet, except for the clink of rigging from the training boats. Young cadets shouting drill calls in the far distance. I used to stand where they were. Now, I sit here. A shadow approached from behind. Boots too new, too nervous. I didn't turn until I heard the voice. "Ma'am, are you Commander Vance?" I looked up. A girl, barely 20. Buzzed hair, square shoulders, calluses not yet hardened. Her name tag read Ortega. "That depends who's asking." She smiled awkwardly, holding a brown paper bag in both hands. "They told me to bring this to you. And they also said," she hesitated, "they said you once turned down the Navy Cross, because accepting it would reveal a mission that could have compromised the lives of your team." I said nothing, just looked at her. Let her fill the silence with whatever myth she had been told. "Is it true?" she asked. I smiled slightly. Not an answer, not a denial either. "The truth is usually lonelier than the story," I said. "But stories keep people going, so maybe that's the better version." She nodded slowly, didn't ask more, didn't press. Good instinct. "You ever want to take it back?" she asked after a moment. "The medal?" She nodded. I shook my head. I never wore the uniform for a medal, and I certainly didn't wear it for applause. I paused. I wore it because some people needed to come home, and someone had to make sure they could. She stared at me as if trying to memorize my words. But words are slippery when you're young. You don't understand their weight until you've watched one slip through someone's last breath. She offered me the paper bag. It's from the mess. They said you liked pecan bars. I took it, nodded in thanks, and she turned to leave. But just as she walked away, she asked over her shoulder, "Do you miss it?" I looked back toward the water. Did I? A memory surfaced. One I didn't chase. It came on its own. My first covert op. Northern Yemen. Night drop. Target extraction. High risk. Before boarding, I stood in the empty locker room, stripped of rank, name, and identity. Raymond had given me one last thing before I left. His wedding band. "Wear it if it helps," he said. "Leave it if it doesn't." I held it for a long moment, then took mine off too, slid them both into a locker, closed the door. It wasn't about leaving him. It was about leaving the version of me who needed to belong. Out there, no one knew Natalie Vance. Out there, I was just a shadow in the dark, measured only by the lives I saved and the ones I didn't. I never put that ring back on. Back in the present, the wind carried the scent of salt and old metal. I reached into the paper bag, took a bite of the pecan bar. Too sweet, too soft, just like they always were. And still, I finished it. Because some legacies aren't about honors or headlines. Sometimes it's a private moment on an old bench, with a recruit who doesn't need to know everything, just enough to believe that honor is still alive in someone. And sometimes, that's more than enough. They say your legacy is written by those who outlive you, but mine? It was written in the silence between orders, in the breath I held when I chose not to speak, in the shadow I stepped into so others could walk in the light. I once stood in full uniform at a promotion dinner, a room filled with polished brass and wine glasses. I was handcuffed in front of them all. By my own brother, he called me a fraud, a traitor, a ghost. But I said nothing, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because there are some truths that don't need defending. They defend themselves, in time. I've learned that silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the only strength you have left, especially when the people you thought would protect you are the ones placing the noose. I walked out of that room with my head high, not because the world cleared my name, but because I never wore it for them in the first place. I've been called many things: commander, sniper, spy, wife. But the name that matters most? Teacher. Today I stood at the back of a ceremony, not for me, for them. Dozens of new female officers stood tall in their fresh dress whites, eyes gleaming with a fire the world hadn't tried to dim yet. I didn't stand on stage. I didn't salute. I just watched. And when they tossed their hats into the air, a familiar hand rested gently on my shoulder. Raymond. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. We had both lost too much to need words now. Behind them, the Navy flag rippled under a gray sky, not in triumph, in quiet endurance. So here I am now, talking to you. Maybe it's late where you are. Maybe you're listening with a warm cup of coffee at sunrise, or curled up under a blanket after a long, weary day. I don't know what brought you here, but I hope something in this story reminded you. You're not alone. We all carry names we no longer speak, memories we hide in back closets of our hearts, mistakes, sacrifices, and the people we couldn't save. If I could choose again, I'd still let him put those cuffs on me. Because there are victories that aren't meant to be seen, only felt. I once refused a medal, because accepting it meant betraying a name I swore I'd never say out loud. I let the myth grow instead. Because in some corners of the world, legends save more lives than facts. There are honors you carry quietly. There are truths you bury, not to forget, but to protect. And sometimes, there are moments when justice doesn't wear a robe or a badge. It wears your silence, your restraint, your choice to let go without letting it break you. I never wore the uniform for them. I wore it for the girl I used to be, the one no one believed in, the one who never got invited to the table but still built her own. And to her, I say this: you were never invisible. You were just waiting for the right moment to show up. On your own terms. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with sunlight breaking through your blinds? Or a still, lonely night where stories like this keep you company? Tell us in the comments. We read every single one, with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing. Not just to hear more stories like mine, but to be part of something bigger. A space that believes in kindness, healing, second chances, and strength that doesn't need to scream to be felt. Thank you for spending your time here today. Wherever you are, whatever you carry, just know this. Sometimes the miracle you need doesn't knock loudly. It waits quietly until you're ready to open the door.